Aloha and welcome back to Wanderous. I'm your host, Andrew Crusoe. I have had a heck of a week, but I'm not going to drop the ball on this show. I'm going to keep going, and I just came back from a walk, which refreshed my perspective. My eyes were able to focus on things further than 20 centimeters, and I feel better now. Welcome back. Should I change the song? I mean, I feel like it's pretty versatile in a weird kind of bumblebee sort of way. So today's story is also about a walk. Honestly, one of my favorite, perhaps. Yeah, I actually, this is my favorite hike that I went on in Europe, in the European mainland. And that is the hike to the Croix de Marseilleveyre. And I will try to put in the show notes, I will try to find some very silly videos that I took and put on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, because that was something I was doing a lot of at that time. Was trying to play around with those platforms, and I was shooting some vertical video, which I don't really like. Most of 90%, I would say, the video that I shoot is widescreen 4K, because this vertical video I don't think is going to be around. This is another show altogether. I don't think it's going to be around in 15 years. I think it's going to be three-dimensional widescreen video. But that is outside of the scope, out of scope of this particular episode. This episode is about an amazing place you can visit too, for free, when you go to Marseille in the south of France, on the Côte d'Azur. Côte is coast, is the, Azur is blue. That's why everything sounds so great in French. You can say the blue coast, but if you say Côte d'Azur, you're like, oh my gosh, what could it mean? It sounds so fancy, because all of the words in French sound fancier, in my opinion. So I download an app called All Trails, which is fine, but I honestly tend to just look at local signs, and I look around, and I went behind, there was this, I was in La Baumette, I might put it in the show notes, and I knew, see, Google Maps is very useful because the satellite imagery, I highly recommend, if you're going to do a hike, to look at the satellite, this is a tip, look at the satellite imagery of where you're going to hike. Get a feel for how forested is this place. How steep are the inclines? Also look at terrain. Terrain is another view mode in Google Maps. And if you zoom in real close, you can even see there are lines, there are strata where it will even indicate how high those points are. It's very small. You might need to use a special assistive mode in your operating system to zoom the pixels or whatever. Take a screenshot and zoom it. You can do that too. But you can see like 1,000 meters, 1,200 meters. Every 100 meters, there's a line in the terrain view. There's that's a tip. I don't know if everybody knows that, but terrain view in Google Maps will help you get an idea also. And yeah, there are apps, but sometimes these apps aren't as user-friendly. Sometimes they don't cover where you're going to be going. And Google Maps has excellent coverage globally, in my experience. So I did that and did tons of other research as well. And I found on the way to this Croix de Marseilleveyre, which is a famous cross erected on top of the hill of Marseilleveyre, which provides an amazing view that I was going to enjoy, even better than the view from Notre Dame de la Garde, where I'd been a week before, something like that. This was going to be, spoilers, this was the best hike I did in France, definitely. And I would get a gorgeous view of the Mediterranean, but we'll get to that. First, I started down this path. It was quite dry, it was still toward the end of summer. It was August. There had been several fire warnings, and they had, in fact, closed the Calanque National Park several times since I'd been there. And they're very careful about this because It's sort of like dealing with Yellowstone in fire season. They really need to monitor how these conditions are affecting people and how dangerous it will be to actually be in the park. And the French government takes that pretty seriously, which is good. The park was thankfully open that day, and I went around and went to the thing, and it was behind this area. I can put it in Google Maps, but I sort of like near Leclerc, which is a grocery store. I went a few blocks up. I saw another couple walking back. I said, "Oh, how's it?" And they're like, "It's great." And I just start basically walking into the forest. I don't have a bunch of pictures from the beginning of this hike. The first picture I have, I must have come across it pretty quickly, where I came across Fontaine de Voire, which is the fountain of Voire. I'm going to murder the pronunciation. Fontaine de Voire. I can pronounce it in Voire, but it's Voire, and I just have to describe this thing. So, I get almost lost several times because the trails are not always clearly marked. You should be careful. Please go in with a phone that has GPS and or a compass, because it can, you have an idea of your directions, but there are these hills they're kind of turny and confusing. But I turned around and I came across this massive outcrop of rock, and inside was what looked like it was going inside of this tiny little cave, and something had been built in front of it. So I took this was a very interesting perspective, and of course these photos will be available to the people who support the show on patreon.com/HelloCrusoe. Thank you very much. You know who you are, and that's the best way to get all the behind-the-scenes stuff on this show. The audio edition of this show is free. Except for occasionally I do very special and spicy episodes of things I wouldn't want to release publicly. But the audio is free, and you're welcome to just follow for free. You can follow at patreon.com/hello, CRUSOE. I give a lot of stuff away for free, and if you ever want to join for just a month and cancel, that's fine too. But I really love the interaction that I get on there with people who follow my work and follow my tropical sci-fi as well, which is going to be coming back much more in the future. So I walk up to this weird cave, and I realize it's almost a cave, but it sort of stops. It sort of stops after a few meters, but in front of it is a pool in a spring. And of course, I've read about this. This is a fountain I think this is really cool. This is a legend connected to the founding of Marseille itself as a city. I think this is pretty cool. So I did some research, and the most I can gather is that according to the legend, Phocaeans, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, Phocaeans, Phocaeans landed on the port of Marseille something like, I want to say it was like 2,000 years ago. I need to double check this. Let me double check. 600 BC. 600 BC. They landed while an important ceremony was about to take place. The king's daughter, Gyptis, I'm not sure which way to pronounce that, she was about to be married. And the two Phocaean chiefs, one of whom was named Protus, they were invited to the wedding banquet. And according to the local custom, the king's daughter was supposed to choose her husband at this feast, this banquet, by offering him a glass of fresh water drawn from this fountain, from the fountain of Voire. So this place is old. It's over 2,000 years old. Like I said, 600 BC. So that evening, Gyptis, I guess, was very impressed by how charming Protus was and offered him a cup of this water from the fountain. And the king, her father, donated the land to the husbands of the Calanque du Lacidon, where Protus founded the city that would become Marseille. So I don't have all of the details about that, but if you want to correct me in the comments, this is when I shamelessly bait you to comment. But seriously, I haven't delved into. I've been extremely extra distracted lately with things I won't get into. But if you want to point me in a good direction to get some reliable information in English about the legend of Fontaine de Voire, and I have a bit about that on my Instagram and website as well, please feel free to correct me. But I thought that was very interesting that this woman chose Protus, who may have been a real person, and he inherits this land from the king, and Protus decides to found the city of Marseille on that land. And this is a legend from the year 600 BC. So what year is it now? Maybe you're listening to this in 2100, but this is being recorded in 2024, over 2,600 years ago. I thought that was pretty cool. And the place itself is quite beautiful and strange. There are sort of like special masonry, very crude masonry around the fountain itself. People who support the show for $10 a month or more will be able to see photos of that very up close. It's a very pretty, it's a very pretty area. The trail branches off to the right where this small pool will then be to your left. You can't really go too far in. It's just a very interesting, it looks like a place that's had a lot of things happen there and then sort of like cleaned up and then abandoned. But there's sort of almost an elvish kind of feeling. The limestone rocks are very crumbly and sort of make up the trail. I got some very pretty photos just coming around these bends and around these rock formations. And after a while, you start to get some real elevation. And this is the fun part. This is the fun part. You get a perspective. And I start to realize, like, whatever... I read a bit about this. So apparently, much of this area was underneath the sea. And there were corals a long time ago. And then geologic processes pushed these rock formations above the Mediterranean Sea. And now we have all of this wealth of limestone formation, which is visible all over the place, like even across the valley, even from Croix de Marseilleveyre, that you could see quite far inland, several kilometers inland, you could see these big towering limestone formations, which is pretty cool. So I finally get higher and higher, and I'm following these narrow trails along, you could pretty much fall and die. I'm going around steep rounded hilltops and things like this, and things that aren't rounded. Things are very intense. And I finally get to a spot, and I see the city, and I see the Ferris wheel, and I see Notre Dame way in the distance. And I have a lot of fun snapping photos as much as I can, taking some panoramas, which I will share, very pretty panoramas. And then I get to this trail marker, which was not intuitive, that were color-coded. But the problem was that bits of it were broken off. I'll put this in the show notes too, or in the bonus. I thought that was pretty goofy, but I was able to get, yes, this shot definitely. So you're going along these, it's very much any interesting hill trail. You'll be going along the edge of it for a while, and then there's always little shortcuts. You can go steeper, or you can take the more chill route. And to my left, almost the entire time, is a wall of limestone, just straight up. I'm going right at the edge. I'm just sort of snaking around and around until I get to the top. And at around after 6, I finally get to the top, which is okay. It's okay. Why is it okay? Because it's middle of August, and it doesn't get dark until like 9 o'clock. So I got lucky there. And I finally get to the top, and not only do I have a gorgeous panoramic view of Marseille, and not only do I take some very cheesy photos in front of the large wooden cross, quite large, 3 meters it looks like, at least 2, quite large. But I get a cool view of something I haven't seen much, which are these islands off of the coast in the Mediterranean, these limestone islands. And I'll definitely include the photos of these little limestone islands, which I've read about today, and they are bird reserves and other nature reserves. No one lives on these islands. People do dive. Some people scuba around there or snorkel. People, hang out, but nobody lives there, and you have to get permission to go for some of them. And it's just such a dramatic landscape. These little this scrub brush in the grass is just clinging to life on this limestone, most of which has very little or no, just zero soil whatsoever. And the sun just starts to set and go down and go down and go down. And I took one of my favorite photos, number 813445-1. I just love this photo. And you can see these sheer cliff drop-offs. This little, just finger of a limestone island, just a couple meters above the sea of the Mediterranean. And the horizon just hazing off into nothing. It's just a real singular image in my mind. I think I had that as my phone background for a while. It's very, very nice. I like that one a lot. But I want to make this interesting for the people who can't afford to get these photos, can't afford to get access to these. And I will also describe, there were abandoned buildings, old stone buildings that it was not entirely clear to me what they were used for. But there was this building up there that almost felt like an abandoned chapel. And the whole side of it was just torn, like a monster had ripped it apart in half. But it was so peaceful inside. And that's another thing I loved about France was they don't just tear something down because it's destroyed. There's a big movement to preserve ruins in interesting constructions, we'll say. So as the sun was just dripping down toward the horizon, I decided to go back to where I was staying via a different route, we could say. And I apparently was so distracted trying to take this route that I didn't take tons of photos, but I have one that really strikes me that I'll get to. So I'm going around, I'm looking at my Google map, I'm getting signal here and there, I'm caching my results as much as I can. And I get to a wall. And the trail continues. Now, this is a trail I could tell that people have used. And it's, it's very comfortable temperature. It's not going to get that cold tonight. I'm in very little danger, That part of, France in general is pretty safe. So I could afford to be a little bit spontaneous and vaguely reckless about not knowing exactly where I was. Especially being a tall-ish guy, my experience is going to be different than some people's experience, and I acknowledge that. But my experience was that I felt very safe, and I get to this wall, and I'm following the trail along, and then I get to a hole in the wall, and I can tell the trail goes inside of this area, and I find myself just in the middle of more ruins that are not there's no plaque, there's no explanation. And I find another opening. I think I must have gone through some old, I don't know, it was some old courtyard or something, or some old monastery wall, or I'm not sure. But I was intrigued by what seems like a version of a cross. There's just a vertical X in red that had been painted onto the wall later. Now, this might have been just some version of graffiti. It might have been some, gang marker. But it was the only thing that was painted of any intentionality. There's a little bit of purple stuff on the wall, but this seemed very intentional. And I'm going to include it in the bonus for people who get the bonuses. And I would love to hear when you see it. This was a pretty intense wall, too. It was hundreds of years old. just going on for meters and meters and meters, at least a foot thick. And I thought that was very intriguing. It felt very important, but forgotten at the same time. So that's the brief story of me hiking Croix de Marseilleveyre, the cross of Marseille. And I'm sure, if you want to know all the history about it, you can find something about that. But I would just say I highly recommend that you hike around the Calanques. I highly recommend you hike around Croix de Marseilleveyre. You can see it in Google Maps. I may put a link to that location specifically in the show notes for this, which can always be found at patreon.com/Hello Crusoe, HELLOCRUSOE. That's where this show lives. It might live in other places in the future, but it's always going to be there. And Spotify. If you're not already following on Spotify, please go check it out on Spotify. It really is one of the best ways to make sure you don't miss any of the episodes. And I've got some really good adventures coming up. My dirty secret is that I sort of want to just zip through France because the stuff that happened after was more edgy and crazy. But I also don't want to forget any of the beautiful things that happened to me in France, and there was a lot of nice experiences that happened in France as well. I will probably start to not skip around, but I'll probably start to summarize a few things. There's so much art. There's so many perspectives you can take in Marseille, physically and metaphorically. And next time I'm going to share, probably next time, I'm just going to share a bit about some spontaneous walking tour, which happens, would also happen in Brussels later on in this adventure, and just how gorgeous the town is. And I guess, and then that's about it. And then I go to Paris. So thank you for following along. Thank you for your interest in the show. Thank you so much to everyone who's commented. And I can't wait to share with you what happened in Paris, because Paris, I actually was very blessed and things worked out pretty well in Paris. And I did it for way cheaper than I thought I could. And I'll share some tips on how to do that coming up. So make sure you subscribe. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you next time. Aloha.